Where should I even start? I suppose it all began with those arguments. Typical, really, just the usual bickering over finances. I mean, every couple fights about money, right? But with Chloe, it wasn't merely a matter of not having enough. It felt like she craved more than I could possibly provide. We were never destitute, but we certainly weren't swimming in cash either. I had a regular job. Nothing fancy, but it covered the bills. At least it used to. As for Chloe, she dreamed of the lifestyle we saw in those ridiculous TV shows. Fancy dinners, designer outfits, the whole shebang. That wasn't what our life was like when we first got together. Back then, she seemed, well, I don't know, normal. We enjoyed each other's company. But over time, it felt like she was transforming into someone I hardly recognized. Our arguments started small, centered on why I couldn't afford to take her on vacation or why we were still driving the same old car. But then they escalated. There were nights we hardly spoke. And when we did, it felt like she was just angry, leaving me feeling inadequate. Then one day, the fights just stopped. At first, I thought it was a positive sign, like maybe we had finally turned a corner. But something fell off. Chloe wasn't complaining about money anymore, but she started coming home with things we definitely couldn't afford. The first item was a designer handbag. I didn't even recognize the brand, but it reeked of expense. I asked her, "Where did you get that?" She just waved her hand dismissively, saying, "It was on sale. A total steal." That didn't sit well with me, but I brushed it off. I didn't want to spark another argument, you know? I was exhausted from the endless back and forth. But then more things appeared. Jewelry, a new phone, items that were way out of our budget. Each time I raised a question, Chloe had a ready excuse. Sales, knockoffs, you name it. I tried to convince myself that maybe I was overreacting, that perhaps she had stumbled upon some incredible bargains. But deep down, I knew something was off. Talk of finances vanished from our conversations. It was like the topic had disappeared overnight. Still, I couldn't shake this nagging feeling. I'd catch her stealing glances at her phone, smiling at messages I wasn't privy to. If I asked her who it was, she'd casually reply, "Just Laura," or "just a friend from work." It felt like she was dismissing me, treating me like I was some clueless fool. At first, it was subtle. She'd turn her body away while texting, or her tone would shift when she answered certain calls. I tried not to make a big deal out of it. Maybe I was just being paranoid, I reasoned. After all, our relationship wasn't terrible. It just wasn't what it used to be. You convince yourself of all sorts of things to avoid facing the truth, right? You ignore the little red flags because confronting the reality is too daunting. But looking back, it's clear I was blind to the signs. Work was the same old grind, monotonous but reliable. I wasn't one to complain, but during lunch breaks, my buddies and I would chat about our marriages. Tom from accounting would share how his wife had maxed out their credit card on a new kitchen appliance, and the whole table would nod in sympathy. There was always someone recounting stories of financial woes, how money was tight, or how their wives desired things they simply couldn't afford. It was relatable, at least for me, but as they shared their stories, I found myself going quiet, not because I had nothing to say, but because I didn't want to admit that my situation was off. As Chloe distanced herself, I kept telling myself it was nothing to worry about. One day, Tom mentioned that he and his wife were seeing a therapist due to their money troubles. I felt a strange pang in my chest because I knew, deep down, I should have been talking to someone as well. But instead, I just nodded along, pretending everything at home was fine. I was a fool for not recognizing it sooner. With time, Chloe grew even more distant. It wasn't just the pricey purchases or her secretive phone habits. It was her whole demeanor. She seemed perpetually distracted, like she wasn't really present even when she was sitting right next to me. Our conversations turned shallow, merely surface-level chatter. I'd ask about her day, and she'd respond with short, clipped answers, as if I was a nuisance. Hell, she barely even touched me anymore. Not that our sex life had been fantastic before, but now it felt like she couldn't stand the sight of me. One night, I attempted to get close to her, thinking perhaps we just needed some intimacy. She recoiled, claiming she was tired, but the way she said it, it was different. There was no warmth, no affection, just cold rejection. And that's when it hit me. She wasn't merely tired, she was done. But here's the kicker. she wasn't done living her life. Oh no, she had plenty of energy for her friends and her nights out. It was just me she had no time for. I'd see her getting dressed up, looking like she was off to some upscale club, while I sat there in my tattered jeans and a hoodie, wondering what had happened to the woman I once married. And the worst part? I turned a blind eye to it all. I mean, who does that? I kept telling myself it was just a phase, that maybe work was stressing her out, or perhaps she was going through something personal. I even convinced myself that I might be the problem. Maybe I wasn't doing enough. Maybe I wasn't making her feel cherished. I started to try harder, doing more around the house, planning little date nights. Nothing extravagant since, let's face it, we couldn't afford much. But regardless of my efforts, it was never enough. Then one day, she walked in with a brand new phone, something I knew we absolutely couldn't afford. I couldn't help myself and jokingly asked, "What, did you rob a bank or something?" She just laughed it off, brushing my concerns aside with a casual wave. "I snagged it on an amazing deal," she said. That was the moment it hit me. Something was fundamentally wrong. I could no longer lie to myself. From that point on, I began scrutinizing everything about her. Her phone, her outfits, her entire demeanor. It became glaringly obvious that she had transformed into someone unrecognizable, and I was left questioning the reasons behind this change. But I was determined to uncover the truth. You know that unsettling instinct when something feels off? It's like a persistent itch at the back of your mind that you try to ignore, but it eventually consumes your thoughts. That was me, weeks after finally accepting that Chloe was no longer the woman I had married. The peculiar changes in her behavior, along with the influx of high-priced items she flaunted, wouldn't leave my mind. Yet, I lacked concrete evidence. Only this persistent sense that something was very wrong. And then came the moment I couldn't brush aside any longer. It was a Saturday morning when Chloe announced she was going out for coffee with Laura, one of her few close friends. It seemed innocent enough, right? I didn't want to be the paranoid husband, but an uneasy feeling settled in my gut. I couldn't shake the nagging thought about that designer bag she had brought home a few weeks back. She insisted it was just a cheap knockoff from some sale, but the more I examined it, the more I doubted her words. I might not be a connoisseur of designer goods, but that bag didn't feel cheap. It looked way too authentic. For someone who claimed we were barely scraping by, she certainly had a knack for showcasing a lot of high-end items lately. I found myself sitting on the couch, staring at that bag for what felt like an eternity. I knew I shouldn't be doing this, but I needed to uncover the truth. My fingers twitched, desperate to grab it and determine if I was merely overthinking things. So I picked it up, turned it over in my hands, and decided to do a little online research. Surely, there must be a way to tell if it was the real deal. A few minutes of searching led me to tips on how to identify fakes. I compared everything: the stitching, the logo, even the minuscule details like the zipper. And then it struck me like a sledgehammer to the gut. This bag was authentic, a genuine designer piece worth more than what we had stashed away. We couldn't afford this. Hell, we couldn't afford half of the luxury items she'd been flaunting lately. My heart plummeted, and an icy dread settled in my stomach. She had deceived me. I don't even know what compelled me to do it, but I immediately attempted to call her. My fingers trembled as I dialed, and my heart raced like a drum in my chest. Of course, she didn't pick up. No surprise there. I tried again. Nothing. Panic began to creep in, and I was already sweating, questioning where the hell she was if she wasn't truly with Laura. That's when I decided to call Laura. I didn't know why I thought she would cover for Chloe, but I needed answers. When she picked up, her voice sounded completely relaxed, as if nothing was amiss. "Hey, Laura," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just checking in. Are you guys still having coffee?" There was a pause, just long enough to make my stomach drop. "Coffee? I'm at home, Ryan," she replied, sounding perplexed. I wasn't planning on meeting Chloe today. Her words hit me like a freight train. I gripped the phone so tightly I thought I might shatter it. I could barely respond, mumbling something about a mix-up before hanging up. My mind was racing. Where on earth was Chloe? And more importantly, why was she lying to me? I sat there for what felt like hours, fixating on that damn bag, my thoughts swirling chaotically. I was furious, but more than that, I felt profoundly betrayed. I didn't want to accept it. Maybe there was a perfectly good explanation, some convoluted reason behind her lies, but deep down I knew. I absolutely knew. Something was happening, and it went far beyond financial strain. I couldn't confront her. Not yet. I needed more evidence. I didn't want to charge in blindly, accusing her of something without solid proof. So, I decided to play it smart, or at least try to. I had to gather more evidence before I brought it up. I needed to know the full truth, even if it shattered me in the process. The rest of the day was a blur. I was a complete wreck. I couldn't concentrate on anything. Every time my phone buzzed, I jolted, hoping it was Chloe, but she didn't call. When she finally returned home, it was late, and she barely acknowledged me. She tossed her bag down and muttered that she was exhausted, offering no explanation for where she had been all day. I didn't push her, not yet. I wasn't ready for that confrontation. I just nodded, like the clueless idiot I was, and let her retreat to bed without a word. But inside, my thoughts were racing. I kept reminiscing about the early days of our marriage. There was a time when I had complete faith in her. Back then, we had nothing, yet we had each other, and that felt like more than enough. Or at least I believed it was. Now all I could think about was how drastically everything had changed. I can still picture our wedding day vividly. Chloe looked breathtaking, like a vision from a dream, and I felt like the luckiest man alive. She made me believe I could conquer the world. Back then, we didn't fret over finances. We barely scraped together enough for rent, but we were happy. At least I thought I was. I often wonder if she ever felt that way, or if this dissatisfaction had always been lurking beneath the surface, just waiting for the right moment to surface. Those memories only intensified the pain of my current situation. I loved her. I trusted her completely. And now, I was utterly lost. Every little thing she did felt suspect. That night, as I lay next to her in bed, sleep eluded me. My mind was in overdrive, replaying the lies, the excuses, the extravagant things she kept bringing home. Was this really the same woman I married, or had she been hiding this side of herself from the start? The following morning, she came home with yet another new phone. It was sleek, shiny, and clearly not something we could afford. I stared at it as if it were a glaring symbol of her betrayal, concrete proof that I was right all along. When she noticed my gaze, she merely shrugged. "Got it on a fantastic deal," she said, her tone flat, as if this was the most mundane thing imaginable. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My mind was screaming at me to demand answers, to confront her, but I held back. I wasn't ready for that showdown yet. I needed more information. I needed to be absolutely certain. That day, I resolved to keep a watchful eye. I wanted to know where she was going, who she was meeting. The old me would never have stooped to such behavior, never have snooped or doubted her. But that guy was long gone. She had turned me into someone else, someone filled with doubt and suspicion. I wasn't sure how far I would go to uncover the truth, but I knew I couldn't back down now. The lies, the secrecy, it was all accumulating, and I could feel it brewing like a storm ready to erupt. The mere thought of confronting her made my stomach churn. But what choice did I have? If I was going to catch her in the act, I needed to be strategic. I needed to be patient. Yet, with each passing day, my doubts grew. The more I discovered, the less I recognized the woman I thought I knew. And there I was, spiraling into a vortex of anxiety. The lies, the erratic behavior, the overpriced items, everything was piling up, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something crucial. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but let's be real. Everything pointed to Chloe hiding something. The issue was I had no concrete evidence, just an instinct gnawing at me, driving me to the brink. It was late one night when I finally made the decision to check her phone. We were in bed, and Chloe had fallen asleep, her phone resting on the nightstand beside me. I felt like a complete jerk even contemplating it, but what choice did I have? She had lied to me more than once, and the whole situation with Laura, not meeting her for coffee, that had been haunting me for days. I had to find out. With trembling hands, I reached over and grabbed her phone. The screen lit up, and my heart nearly stopped. Locked. Not with the usual passcode. No, this was a new one. The code I once knew was gone, just like my trust in her. My stomach churned as I stared at the screen. Why would she change her password? There was only one reason for that, right? to keep me out. I put the phone back down, trying to suppress my frustration. If I confronted her now, she'd have some excuse ready. I was sure of it. She always did. Instead, I decided to bide my time, as agonizing as it was to wait. I was going to follow her, discover where she really went, and figure out who she was meeting. A few days later, my opportunity presented itself. Chloe told me she was heading to work, just like any other day, but something felt off. The way she said it was too casual, too rehearsed. So, instead of heading to my own job, I waited until she left. I stayed back far enough so she wouldn't notice me, keeping my distance as she walked down the street. Normally, she'd turn left toward the bus stop, but today she went right toward a taxi stand. My heart began to race. Something was definitely amiss. She didn't even glance in the direction of her office. I ducked behind a tree, watching as she climbed into a taxi. My pulse pounded in my ears, and my thoughts raced. I had two choices. Let it go, pretend I hadn't seen anything, or follow her and uncover the truth. I don't know why I hesitated, but in that moment, it felt like everything in our marriage hinged on my next move. I hailed the next cab I saw, barely managing to keep my voice steady. "Follow that taxi," I instructed the driver, sounding like a cliché from some terrible movie. He shot me a puzzled look but shrugged and pulled onto the road. My heart still hammered in my chest, my hands clenched in a fist as I tracked Chloe's taxi ahead of us. As we drove, my mind spiraled into overdrive. Where was she going? What was she up to? And why the hell did she feel the need to lie about it? My thoughts spiraled into a whirlwind of awful scenarios. Was she seeing someone else? Meeting some guy? Was I losing my grip on reality? The cab followed her through the city, weaving through unfamiliar streets. After what felt like hours but was likely only about 10 minutes, her taxi pulled up in front of a building I didn't recognize, a nondescript office structure that looked shabby, the kind of place you wouldn't even glance at twice. My chest tightened as I watched Chloe step out of the taxi and head toward the entrance. She moved with confidence, not a hint of hesitation, as if she'd been there countless times before. The driver glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "You want me to stop here?" "Yeah," I muttered, barely managing to get the word out. I tossed some cash at him and exited the cab, maintaining my distance as I watched Chloe disappear into the building. My legs felt like lead, but I pressed on, trailing her just far enough behind that she wouldn't notice if she turned around. I stood across the street, my mind racing as I tried to piece together the jigsaw of confusion that was my life. What was she doing here? And then, as if fate wanted to stab me in the heart, I spotted him. Daniel. Her boss. He sauntered up to the building with an air of confidence, as if he owned the place. I had never liked the guy, but seeing him here, that was a punch to the gut. My stomach twisted in knots as I watched him walk in right after Chloe. Panic gripped me. Part of me wanted to storm in there and confront them both, but I couldn't act recklessly. I needed more evidence. I needed to be absolutely sure. So I waited. I stood there, like a fool, for what felt like hours, hoping for some explanation that didn't lead to my worst fears. But deep down, I already sensed the truth. After a while, it became clear that neither of them was coming out anytime soon. My head was spinning, my heart racing, as I finally turned to leave. I felt sick, as if I just witnessed the dissolution of everything I thought I knew about my life. But I wasn't done yet. I needed more proof before making any moves. A few days later, I bumped into one of Chloe's former co-workers, a woman named Hannah, at the grocery store. I hadn't intended to ask about Chloe, but as we chatted, the question slipped out. "Hey, how's work going for Chloe? I haven't seen her around much lately." Hannah looked at me, puzzled. "Chloe? She hasn't worked there for months. I thought she told you." My blood turned to ice. My stomach dropped. She hadn't worked there for months? I could barely muster a response, something lame like, "Oh, right, must have slipped her mind." But inside, I was screaming. Months? She had been deceiving me about work for months? As I left the store, my mind raced. What on earth had she been doing all this time? If she wasn't at work, where was she? What was really going on? Everything began to align. The designer bags, the high-priced items, the secret meetings. Chloe had been living a double life, and I had been too blinded by trust to see it. I wandered aimlessly after that, trying to process everything. I watched other couples, people holding hands, laughing, going about their lives as if everything was perfect. All I could think about was how isolated I felt, how utterly alone I was in this mess. I wanted to scream, to confront her right then and there, but I couldn't, not yet. I needed more. The lies had been piling up for months, maybe even years, and I was just beginning to peel back the layers of deceit. I didn't want to believe it, but there was no denying it anymore. Chloe wasn't just hiding things from me. She was leading a completely different life right under my nose. And I was determined to uncover exactly what that life entailed, even if it tore me apart. After what I had witnessed, I couldn't shake the feeling that Daniel was the linchpin in this whole situation. He was no longer just Chloe's boss. He was something much more significant. If he was involved, then perhaps his wife, Emily, was oblivious to it all, just like me. It didn't take long to find her on social media. A few clicks and there she was, smiling in countless pictures with him, as if everything was picture perfect. The thought made me sick. She likely had no idea her life was a facade just like mine. I hesitated before sending her a message. What could I even say? Hey, I think your husband is sleeping with my wife. Want to grab coffee? But I had to know. I needed more information. So, I typed out a straightforward message. Hey, I need to talk to you. It's about Daniel and Chloe. Please, it's important. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. A couple of hours later, she responded. I didn't expect a quick reply, but there it was, a terse message. What is this about? Meet me at the cafe on Broad Street tomorrow, 2 p.m. That was it. No small talk, no pretense. Just straight to the point. The next day, I arrived early, nerves on edge. I hadn't told Chloe where I was going. Lately, she had been acting all sweet, as if nothing had changed. It was driving me mad. She had no clue that I was onto her, and I needed to keep it that way for the moment. Emily walked in shortly after 2, impeccably dressed, like she had stepped right out of a fashion magazine. She was older than Chloe, but there was an undeniable confidence about her, a magnetic quality that drew you in. I wondered if Daniel had any idea what kind of woman he was betraying. She spotted me immediately and walked over, her expression cold and calculating. She didn't even take a seat at first. She just looked me over, sizing me up. What do you want? She asked, skipping the pleasantries entirely. I took a deep breath and jumped right in. I think Daniel is having an affair with my wife. Her expression barely flickered. It was as if I hadn't said anything out of the ordinary. She raised an eyebrow and crossed her arms. And why should I believe you? Frustration boiled within me, and I laid it all out. How Chloe had been lying for months, the designer bags, the secret trips, and how I had seen Daniel enter that building with her. I tried to remain composed, despite the chaos churning inside me. But Emily wasn't having it. She shook her head and stood up abruptly. I don't have time for this nonsense, she snapped. You must be mistaken. Daniel isn't. He wouldn't do that. Before I could get another word out, she turned on her heel and walked away. Just like that. My heart sank. I wasn't sure why I had expected her to believe me. Perhaps because if the roles were reversed, I would have wanted to know the truth. But I guess it's different when you're the one being told your life is built on lies. I returned home that night, angrier than I'd ever been. Chloe was already there, playing the part of the perfect wife. I couldn't even bring myself to look at her. Every time she smiled or asked about my day, I felt a rage building inside, wanting to explode. But I held back. Not yet. Then a few days later, I received a call. It was Emily. She sounded different this time, almost defeated. Ryan, I need to see you, she said quietly. You were right. About Daniel and Chloe. Meet me at the bar on 8th. I arrived that evening, uncertain of what to expect. When I walked in, I spotted her at the bar, a drink already in hand. She looked drained, as if she hadn't slept in days. I slid onto the stool next to her, and before I could say anything, she spoke. I hired someone, she said, her gaze fixed on the glass in front of her. A private investigator. Followed Daniel for a week. And, well, you were right. He's been meeting your wife. Regularly. Hearing those words from her hit me like a freight train. Even though I had suspected it, hearing it confirmed felt like a knife piercing my chest. I downed my drink in one gulp, the burn doing nothing to numb the ache. Emily ordered another round, and before long, we were sitting there, consuming more alcohol than we probably should have. She shared how she had harbored suspicions for months, but had brushed them aside, convincing herself that Daniel was simply busy with work. I recounted the lies Chloe had fed me, the fake coffee dates, and the ridiculous excuses. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel entirely alone in this turmoil. We were both stuck in the same sinking ship. The conversation soon veered into more personal territory. We reminisced about how it all began, our marriages, the good times before everything spiraled into chaos. I told her about the Chloe I used to know, the woman I had fallen in love with, before she became this distant, unfamiliar stranger. Emily shared how Daniel had once been her rock, her partner in everything, until he wasn't. As the drinks flowed, the lines between our grief and anger began to blur. It felt like we were two broken souls leaning on each other in a way neither of us had planned. "I feel like such a fool," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I thought we were happy. I thought he loved me." I couldn't find the right words to comfort her because, honestly, I felt the same. Instead, I reached out and rested my hand on hers. There was something in the way she looked at me, this quiet understanding, this shared pain. Maybe it was the alcohol, or perhaps it was simply the overwhelming weight of our situations, but suddenly we were kissing. It wasn't some grand, passionate moment. It was slow, almost hesitant, as if we were both testing the waters, seeing if it was even okay to feel this way. But as the kiss deepened, the intensity grew, fueled by the weight of our shared betrayal. We stumbled out of the bar into the night, eventually finding our way back to her place. What happened next transcended mere physicality. Sure, there was a tangible attraction. Emily was stunning, and there was an undeniable magnetism about her. But it was deeper than that. We were both in pain, both shattered by the very people we had trusted most. As we undressed one another, there was no hesitation. It was raw and messy, charged with an emotional intensity that felt both liberating and terrifying. For just a fleeting moment, we could forget the people who had broken our hearts and lose ourselves in each other. Afterward, we lay in the dark, enveloped in silence. It wasn't awkward. Instead, there was a strange comfort in it. We didn't need to say much. We both understood this wasn't about love. It was about finding solace amidst the wreckage of our lives, a connection that made the pain just a little more bearable. When I finally left her place that night, I felt a whirlwind of emotions. Part of me was consumed with guilt, like I had lowered myself to Chloe's level. But another part of me, it felt free. It was as if I had taken the first step in reclaiming my life from the chaos Chloe had created. Yet deep down, I knew this was merely the beginning. The next morning, I woke up in a haze, the weight of everything that had transpired settling heavily on my shoulders. The night with Emily wasn't something I regretted, but it also wasn't something I could linger on. It had been an escape, a release for all the pent-up anger and pain that had been festering inside me for months. But now, I had to face the harsh reality. And the harsh reality was Chloe. After that night, Emily and I didn't speak much. Not immediately, anyway. But before I left her place, she dropped a bombshell. She didn't just want to leave Daniel. She wanted to destroy him. Apparently, his entire business, everything he owned, was funded by her family's wealth. Without her, he was nothing, and she was determined to make sure he ended up with exactly that. Nothing. I couldn't deny it. The thought of watching Daniel lose everything gave me a sick sense of satisfaction. But I had my own mess to clean up first. I had to confront Chloe, and I had no idea how that was going to play out. When I got home, Chloe was lounging on the couch, scrolling through her phone as if nothing was amiss. She didn't even look up when I walked in or acknowledge my presence at all. It infuriated me more than it should have. I stood there for a moment, just staring at her, trying to comprehend how I had ended up married to a woman who clearly no longer cared about me. "I know about the affair," I said, my voice cold and slicing through the silence. Chloe's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing as she finally focused on me. But instead of the guilt or fear I had anticipated, I saw something else, amusement. She smirked, as if this was some grand joke. "Oh, do you?" she replied, sarcasm dripping from her words. "Took you long enough." That was it. That smirk, that mocking tone, I couldn't take it anymore. "I'm filing for divorce," I declared, my voice steady even though my heart raced in my chest. "We're done." I expected her to explode in anger or at least show some hint of distress. Instead, she laughed. She actually laughed. "You think I care?" she sneered, rising from the couch and crossing her arms defiantly. "You think I need you? Daniel will take care of me. He has more money than you'll ever have. I won't even notice when you're gone." My blood boiled. I wanted to scream at her, to tell her how delusional she was, how she was throwing everything away for a man who didn't give a damn about her. But I stood there, watching her gloat, knowing something she didn't. I kept quiet, biding my time for when reality would eventually hit her, when her fantasy with Daniel would crumble. And it did, far sooner than either of us expected. Emily wasn't playing around. She had been plotting for a while, and now that she had evidence of Daniel's affair, she moved swiftly. Over the next few weeks, I witnessed everything unravel. Daniel's business began to falter. At first, it was subtle, whispers about bad deals, suppliers pulling out, clients vanishing without a trace. But it wasn't long before things spiraled from bad to catastrophic. Chloe, of course, remained blissfully ignorant. She was still flaunting her new phone and designer bags, strutting around like she was untouchable. Every time I saw her, I had to fight the urge to throw it all in her face, to tell her that Daniel wasn't going to save her. But I held off, wanting her to fully experience the impact when the truth came crashing down. And it didn't take long. One night, she returned home, her face pale and devoid of confidence. She looked like she had just seen a ghost. "What's wrong?" I asked, desperately trying to suppress a smirk. She didn't answer right away, sinking onto the couch and burying her face in her hands. After a few moments, she looked up, her eyes wide with panic. "Daniel's business it's going under," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He says he's lost everything. He doesn't know what to do." I couldn't help it. I laughed, but it wasn't a kind laugh. It was cold, bitter, filled with the satisfaction I had longed for. "Guess he's not the savior you thought he was," I retorted, venom lacing my voice. Chloe stared at me, her mouth agape in disbelief. She was at a loss for words. For the first time in ages, she looked completely lost, like she had no plan and no one to turn to. "I thought," she stammered, tears welling in her eyes. You thought wrong." I cut her off sharply. "You threw away everything for him, and now he's got nothing. And so do you." That was the moment it all came crashing down for her. The reality that she had left me, mocked me, for a man who couldn't even hold his own life together hit her like a freight train. Her tears began to fall, and for a brief second, I almost felt bad. Almost. But then I remembered all the lies, the deception, the months of humiliation. Any sympathy I might have felt vanished in an instant. "I'm leaving," I declared, snatching my jacket off the chair. "And when I come back, I want you gone. I don't care where you end up, but you are not staying here." She didn't respond. She just sat there, quietly sobbing as I walked out the door. Meanwhile, Emily was taking decisive action. She cut ties with Daniel and stripped him of every asset she could seize. I wasn't privy to the details, but whatever her strategy was, it worked. Daniel lost everything: his business, his home, his savings. He ended up with nothing but the clothes on his back. Without Emily's financial support, he had no chance of recovering. I heard through the grapevine that he tried to make things work with Chloe for a bit, but that didn't last long. The moment he realized he couldn't sustain her lavish lifestyle, he walked away, leaving her with nothing, just as Emily had done to him. The last I heard, Chloe was living in a rundown apartment, struggling to get by. She called me a few times, begging for help, but I didn't pick up. Why should I? She had made her choice, and now she needed to face the consequences. I wouldn't say I was happy, exactly, but I wasn't broken anymore. Watching Chloe's world crumble didn't fix everything, but it felt like karma was finally evening the score. I wasn't surprised when Chloe began reaching out after Daniel dumped her. Initially, it was just phone calls. Then she started showing up at my place, looking desperate. One evening, I found her sitting on the porch when I got home. She looked haggard, as if all her confidence had evaporated. "Ryan, can we talk?" she asked, her voice trembling. I paused for a moment before replying. "I don't know what you want, Chloe. There's nothing left to discuss." She blinked, struggling to hold back tears. "I made a mistake," she whispered. "Daniel, I thought." "You thought wrong," I interrupted. "I'm filing for divorce. I don't care where you go, but you're not staying here." For a moment, she attempted to manipulate me, insisting that she still loved me, that we could work things out. But I was done. I saw through her facade. "You don't need me, remember? Go find someone else to support you." And with that, I walked past her, leaving her behind, along with the years of toxicity she had forced upon me. Once she was gone, I began focusing on what I truly wanted for the first time in years. I had always dreamed of starting my own business, but Chloe had always pushed me down, making me feel inadequate. Now, with her out of the picture, I took the leap. It started slowly, but before long, my small home repair business began to flourish, and I was thriving in ways I had never imagined. A few months later, I met Sarah. She was a client at first, but we hit it off and eventually it blossomed into something more. She was nothing like Chloe. Sarah was kind, grounded, and made me feel valued. With her, I felt supported rather than judged, and for the first time, I experienced what a healthy relationship could be. Looking back, I realized that Chloe had held me back for years. She made me feel like I had to chase some impossible dream just to keep her satisfied, but in the end, I was better off without her. Now, I'm free to be myself without the burden of her expectations weighing me down.